Today on Empowering Workplaces, we're going to be talking about employee well-being with Melis Abacıoğlu, a well-being visionary and founder and CEO of Wellbees.
Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, a show for anyone who wants to make work better and more fulfilling. We're your hosts, organizational psychologist Sanya Lucina
and aspiring leader Guille Santana. Join us in today's inspiring conversation.
Melis, it's such a pleasure to have you on with us. Anyone who is a fan of employee well-being is a friend of ours. And when we got introduced to you and found out that you built a whole company and a whole technology around it, Guy and I just thought, oh, we absolutely have to bring you on and have you share your wisdom and your passion with our listeners because, oh boy, is employee well-being important. I would probably say it's always been important, but maybe even more now than ever, just because of, I think emotionally, as a humanity, we're going through so much. And I think in some ways, as we've encouraged ourselves to open up and embrace it, we're going through almost these like different evolutions of how do we show up at work? What do we do as individuals? What do we do as managers? What do we do as organizations? So as we embrace the importance of well-being, I think oftentimes, we still have more questions than answers on how to do it right. So it's just an absolute pleasure to have you on with us. And we're just really, really excited about all the insights, all of your research, and everything that you do for you to share with our listeners. So welcome to the show.
Hi, both. It's so nice to be here. And as you said, this has been an endeavor of more than a decade now. So I've been on this path for a little over 10 years now. So I have a lot of stories to share with you.
Yes.
And the world has changed so much in that time frame. So
the last decade. I know. I think if we think back to what was that, 2014, we were talking about well-being a lot less and talking about it probably very differently. And so we jump in, Guy and I have lots of questions ready for you. Before we jump in, could you just please tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, your organization, just anything personal, professional that you think would be valuable for them to know as we jump into this really important conversation?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, my name is Melis, and I've been working on employee well-being a little over a decade now. And so it all started after college. I went to school in New York at Columbia. I did a double major in math and art history, Sanya. And, that's completely relevant to employee well-being, of course. But no, I was a very confused, I would say, teenager who then decided, this is not, I don't want to do I don't want to do art history or math. I want to do something completely different, but I didn't know what that different thing was. So I tried a lot of different things, like an art internship, an NGO internship in Rwanda, and journalism in Italy. Like, I tried so many things, and I realized there's so many things I would have loved changing in the workplace. And also, both of my parents are doctors, Sanya. So they're like, one of them is a plastic surgeon, the other one is a gynecologist. So I grew up with them, quote unquote, healing the world, in different aspects, of course. One of them aesthetically and the other one more in a health sense. But growing up with them, I always thought that was for me, but I never tried that, right? So after finishing college and all of those internships, I thought, why not try it in healthcare sector? Maybe that might be interesting. So I tried it out in healthcare. I fell in love with it. 5 years after college, I worked in healthcare, and I was like, oh my God, this is it. I love this. And that's when I decided about a decade ago, the healthcare system is not what I was expecting that it was, because healthcare sector is a bit upside down, so to say. So you make money when somebody gets sick. In other words, I thought, could there be a better way of dealing with this? Could we just take people when they're okay and help them thrive? So with that idea, Wellbees was born about a decade ago as an employee well-being consultancy. that's then later turned into an employee well-being platform. And now I'm the CEO of Wellbees, who's now we're operating in over 100 countries, touching the lives of 250,000 people every day in 10 different languages.
Wow.
So it has become, yeah. So you know, what was in the beginning a small idea, a question, really, turned into this like passion, and then it turned into this venture that is growing every day.
I love that. And I think that, I agree with you. There's such a huge opportunity still to educate people how to take care of themselves and to hold them accountable. And I think even when I started my career, which was probably about 20 years ago, I remember, the saying, burning the midnight oil and working late and getting
Yeah,
little sleep were all badges of honor. And
true.
now you think today, and when somebody tells me that they slept very little and still say it kind of with pride, I'm like, "Oh, no, like, do you know how unhealthy that is for you? And do you know how dangerous it can be? And it's so not good. Like, please take care of yourself." And so I think more people are educated about now than they were, a decade or two ago. But I think that there's
I agree.
still a huge opportunity to change behavior, and there's a huge opportunity to hold us accountable and prioritize our well-being. And even
Yeah.
for me, as somebody that also dedicates my career to it, and I'm an organizational psychologist, so I've studied and I, in some cases know better, I still struggle oftentimes
All
to
of
say
us
like,
do.
right, right. And that's like, thank you for saying that, because by now I've said it so much, and like I've been lucky that oftentimes people on the other end will say like, don't be so hard on yourself. Like,
Mm.
there's not necessarily a perfection, there's not necessarily an end goal, but if you continue to work towards it, you're always gonna, continue to get better. And so knowing that, again, I just think there's such a tremendous opportunity. I'm so happy for your path and just for your reach, and that you're working with so many different people. And so with that, one thing that I'd love to ask you is, there's a debate, of course, like is well-being an individual, a manager,
Mm.
an organizational responsibility. I think most of us would say that it's, everybody a little
Yeah.
bit. And so when it comes to organizations and when it comes, to different employers, what are some things that you've seen companies do right? Something that
Mm.
you would celebrate, or something that would particularly,
Yeah.
because I imagine for our listeners today, a big part of the reason why they tuned into to the podcast is for ideas. Because
Yeah.
yes, I'm in, but how do I really make this happen? Like, what do I do?
Mm. So, Sanya, what you said, like how you began this question, actually asks for an answer. So, I will start with that. So, I think those companies that are doing it right know that it's the responsibility of a little bit of both, right? Like your teams, your managers, your top level management. It's like everybody has stake in this. And we've done recently a large survey with PwC in 5 different countries. And the survey was called S in ESGs, the environmental, social, and governance reporting, which most of the HR professionals that we see are doing at the moment, especially the S part in ESGs. And we've asked various questions, and we were trying to see if there are any correlations between employee well-being and the rest of the ESG spectrum. And here's what we saw, Sanya, and I find that very interesting. So employee well-being, among various other things, it's the highest correlated with psychological safety. So if there's psychological safety in the workplace, with 72% chance, that brings about employee well-being. So the best of the best organizations, Tanya, go after this. They go after the psychological safety of organizations before they start with a well-being app, before they start with a well-being, I don't know, HR policy, before they start with anything else. They just start looking at this. How do they start looking at this is another question, of course. But let's go back and revisit this idea. So what's psychological safety? Psychological safety, as you know, as an organizational psychologist, it's the ability to be able to tell what's on your mind about the business without fearing the consequences. And psychological safety lives in pockets within an organization. and it's dependent on managers. When I say pockets, I mean the pockets of managers. Usually it's around them. And I'll share one more piece of like interesting data with you. We looked back at our 250,000 people's data, and we've seen that employees' moods differ only by 5% from their managers. So there is this very symbiotic relationship. So those who have tuned in to this podcast today, like I guess the best way to start doing employee well-being today, like if you can't go about like hiring Wellbees and doing like a whole like employee well-being consultancy and then doing like blah blah, like before doing any of that, we can just start looking at managers, educating managers on the importance of well-being, what that makes, what kind of a difference that makes. There's so much out there, you know. Lately, UKG has done a huge survey of 200,000 employees on managers' effect on teams' well-being. And here's what they found, Sanya. They found that your manager's effect on your well-being is on par with your partner's. Much like maybe double the effect of your therapist's or double the effect of your doctor's effect on you. So a manager and how they behave towards you, behave towards your well-being, behave towards their own well-being actually makes a huge difference in terms of psychological safety, and psychological safety really brings about employee well-being. So I would say this is where great organizations begin with, and they call this, you know, the Good Manager Program. Like, you know, you can name it something fun like that, the Good Managers, or like our Team Well for managers, whatever you want to call it. You can start with managers. That will be your low-hanging fruit, I guess, when you want to go about an employee well-being program today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, as you were saying that, I know we're in a podcast, so our listeners can't see me, but my jaw literally dropped because I know in a lot of research that I've seen, of course, the impact of managers on their employees and how important that relationship is. But wow, I mean, that is huge, and it's a huge responsibility. And I love, like, I will reiterate what you were saying is the importance of, one, making managers aware that they have such a huge impact, and secondly, providing them the education and the resources to know how to best show up for their people.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's something that we can take for granted. I don't think we can say, oh, but intuitively, naturally, managers are going to know what to do, because they won't. Like, we're not all trained psychologists. We don't all go into the workplace understanding our impact. And more often than not, we go into the workplace with these very, like, you know, concrete goals and maybe financial targets. And a lot of times the well-being, if you're not careful, can just kind of fall to the wayside, that you don't take the time to ask people about them, that you don't take the time to give people the space that they need.
Yeah.
And I mean, what you were just sharing, the impact that have is just absolutely enormous. So I think as organizations, it's critical to provide managers with information they need, because otherwise it's going to be really hard for each one of them individually to figure it out and make that kind of impact. It's kind of hard to scale on an individual level.
True. And I'll tell you one more thing maybe here. It's that we're not bad people. None of us are. And as you said, like, most of us are finding it difficult sometimes to cope with life, you know, in general, because like in World Economic Forum, I think that's where they coined the term polycrises. We're living through times of polycrises, right? So it's COVID ends, then the energy crisis starts, that ends, then the inflation crisis starts, then, you know, the de-dollarization of the world, and now we're like seeing a political instability around the world. So like it's just literally one after the other, and it's like the speed of all of this is just, you know, it's a different level. And when we're living through these times of polycrises, it's not that we don't know that well-being is important. We all know. But when we, again, went back to our data and studied our data, Sanya, we saw something else, which is very interesting. we saw that the past 3 years after the onset of COVID, managers have been consistently feeling worse than their teams. I find that very interesting. And like we went back and actually asked people why they think that's the case. And over and over, we've been hearing that they've been toast. Most of the managers we've been talking are saying that there is this, downward pressure for doing more with less money, bringing about more productivity, more profitability, and from bottom to top, like they're hearing that from their teams, they're being asked more flexibility, for more empathy. So they're literally toast in between these managers. So it's not that we don't know. Sometimes we're really cornered and we don't know how to create that environment. So in those cases, I think it's so important to self-reflect and bring yourself back to, back to a level where you can freely breathe and say, okay, I'm actually feeling well today. And then understand the impact of how you're feeling today impacts your teams, and then work from there. So those of you who are listening to this were HR professionals, if you're feeling down today, like this is the one takeaway probably, that this affects your teams.
Yeah, I love that. Melis, and for the organizations that already understand the impact that these well-being programs have on managers, on individual contributors, what are some lessons learned that you have seen companies who have invested in these programs go through and that you can share with our listeners?
Sure. I mean, when you're, Gil, when you're talking about well-being, you're talking about 8 different pillars, right? You're talking about the spiritual, the intellectual, the financial, the social, the environmental, the physical, the emotional. So the whole like holistic approach to well-being. So most of the companies that we work with are looking at it from a very holistic point of view. They have fantastic offerings. But what really creates that difference, Gil? What's the one thing that makes excellent well-being programs stand out from those that are just there, that are just available? 2 things really, two things. One, measure. Those companies that do measure and understand what their well-being program does, what it changes, what the numbers are telling them, make a huge difference. I'll give you an example, Gil, so that you can like maybe visualize it. So for example, we're working with a banking client and 25,000 employees. They have everything. They have literally every single employee well-being offering that's out there. Amazing program, right? But we're like with the data. So they're crazy about data and they deep dive into their data. Here's what they saw. Their mood compared to the sectors and the country's mood is about 20% worse comparatively. So upon seeing this, they were like, okay, why is this gap happening? So we've done a gap analysis and we've seen that in this specific company, females and Gen Z and the workers on the field, so like people who are working in the branches, those are the 3 main groups that create this gap. Mainly like they're behind this gap, So now you're armed with powerful data now. Like you're not just offering things. You're like laser focused on what you need to change today to make your organization a stellar organization. Does that give an understanding about like how it would change things, right? Okay, perfect. So so the measurements that like the well-being analytics really makes a difference. And the number 2 is these organizations, they're not just offering things, they get everybody involved. So they have managers' well-being sessions. They inform about their offerings to them, time after time. Like, I can't stress the importance of communications enough here. So they do it through managers, they do it in town halls, they do it with ambassadors, they do it with posters, they just, they probably spend the exact same amount of money on their program as they do on their communications, time wise. I mean, like, they're not really spending, ad money or anything on it, but just time wise, this is the same amount of time that they're putting into this is to communicate it. So these are the two things that really differentiate amazing programs from programs that are okay.
Yeah. And I love that. And I want to reiterate your second point to the communication piece, because I think I've seen that in so many different parts of my career. And I think particularly HR sometimes has a better opportunity to do that more effectively. Even I come from product development most of my career. And I remember talking with somebody who had just entered it, a friend of mine, and he was saying, oh, we just launched a product, so all the hard work is done. And I was like, oh, my friend, your hard work just started, because now you have usage, adoption, all of that. Like, creating a platform is like, it's tough, but it's fun. And you don't necessarily know if it's going to work or not yet. And so I think it's the same thing what you were saying for HR programs. Like, I was recently talking with a friend, and he had mentioned they had well-being speakers, and he was saying like, oh, this is really cool. And like, with all my friends, like, because I talk about it so much, I feel like if they ever have anything inside their organization, like, they've got to go, or if I find out they didn't, they'll be in trouble. And what he was saying is, he's like, oh, he looked at the invite, he's like, wait, wow, like, there were actually a lot more people invited than showed up, and I'm kind of surprised with that. And we didn't dig into much of the the reason behind that, but I think what you were saying, like, coming at it, because as you were talking, I was thinking, can organizations make some of these programs mandatory for managers, or how do you really make sure people, invest in it? And yes, you can quote unquote force somebody into caring, but really communicating from different ways for them to understand why this is valuable, understand why it's important to them, why it's important to their team. But it's almost like that work never ends. And in some ways, almost like you can never have enough communication channels to get to a different person or different people sending the message. So I just wanted to touch on that, because I think it's such a huge component of any program adoption. And in particularly when it comes to well-being, is that constant message, the constant, like, measuring the engagement of different groups, and then understanding how do we communicate the importance of this so people really truly get it and they really truly prioritize it.
Yeah, I mean, think about this, Sanya, like, again, like, let's say you're a hospital client, like, we have hospitals that we're working with. I mean, there's so many business critical things that are happening, and they fall probably under the more important task list than employee well-being any given day, because literally it's a matter of life or death in these hospitals that we work with. So in those cases, I mean, you need to drive well-being strategically. I think it needs to be driven by, yes, with, the communication happens in different departments from different stakeholders, yes, but it always, unfortunately, always needs to be driven by someone in top management. Somebody needs to say, this is strategically important and I'm behind this, like, and then say it over and over and over and over again, or else, some things, you're trying not to drop the ball. And when you're trying very hard to do that, employee well-being is like, second degree.
All right. Well, Melis, you talked about data and the importance of measuring engagement. But when it comes to ROI, we always, like, as a worker, for me, for example, I always have to give results, right? So on ROI, what are some effective or perhaps creative ways you have seen companies show an ROI on their well-being programs, particularly to like the CEO/CFO types on companies?
Okay, so there are a lot of very creative ways to do it, and I'll start with just one example. So I know HR is listening to this, and I'm sure they've sat down with the CFO, fighting for the budgets. One way to do it is the following. They usually show what currently they're spending on each person. Let's say on their current well-being program, they're spending $10 per person per month. But then if you can get actually another 50% of the organization sign up to this platform, the per person cost would significantly drop down. So that's one thing that I've been seeing over and over being reported. So, and CFOs really buy into that, because when you get a budget, you have a budget. You can't. It's difficult to change that when you already have something budgeted in. But if you can see that the ROI is better now, like you're still paying 100 for it, but double the people are using it, that's always a very, I would say, that's a winner, right? Then I've seen other people use this for turnover calculations. So when we looked at our data, we've seen that about 30 days before somebody leaves your organization involuntarily, or like voluntarily for them, but involuntarily for you, when they leave your organization, the last 30 days, their mood and sleep drops down by approximately 20%. So you can actually see it coming. So if the trend starts happening, we can actually predict that's happening. So you can actually go back with another argument. You can, instead of saying, once somebody uses this platform, we're going to win this much money. Instead of saying that, you can say, I'm going to use this for my most important assets, and that is to keep people in place so that they continue working with me. This is the second way I've seen companies doing it. Some companies look at the cost side of things. What do I mean by that? So from the companies that I'm working with, 3 of them are very focused on the cost side, on the insurance side. So with them, we're working on their insurance claims, and we're systematically, it's been 5 years that we've been working with them. So the past 5 years, we've been working with them to lower those claims that have been happening. So their biggest trend was, let's say, diabetes, and for one of them, it was allergies. So we try systematically, step by step, change behavior with them so that we can give the gift of well-being to these employees who are suffering from these diseases, or who have the chance of contracting these diseases. And then finally, there are some companies that are focusing on the productivity side of things, and they're doing it like this. So for example, I told you the gap, right? The mood gap. Sometimes that gap happens in step counts, for example. They see that they have a meaning, like their average step number of steps is 5,000, and the sector takes on average 7,000 steps. So they make the argument of energy. They say our competitors have higher energy levels because they're more active physically, and we need to carry ourselves to that space so that we can be more productive. But it's a harder sell, because if you're selling to CFO, you need to sell something that shows up in the bottom line. And it's very difficult to prove that last bit.
Yeah, thank you for those examples, because I think it comes up a lot where people are saying, of course, organizations are money driven. And of course, in many cases, they're open to well-being programs because they know it's the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, there's always questions like, we only have so much budget, and what do we invest in it? And a lot of times, I know looking at some of our survey data, like learning and development comes up as one of the top needs for employees. Career progression comes up as one of the top needs. Now, well-being, I would say, is always maybe almost always second greatest opportunity where organizations can improve. And so I will also add, I think, to all of your arguments, if organizations are surveying their employees, there's probably some interesting data they can pull from that. Absolutely. To complement the ROI, right? Because often the surveys, it won't give you the ROI bit, but it'll say like, hey, we do have this big gap. But now when you do talk to the CFO, the more effectively you can maybe even ask if you don't know what's important to him or her before, and then go back with that argument is really important. But thank you for addressing that so thoroughly, because I do think that that's one of the biggest challenging areas where the, big well-being advocates who we come across will say, it's a lot of times it's a matter of money, and I'm always looking for a better way to make the case that resonates with a person that actually holds that budget. So I think your recommendations were really, really valuable. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So Melis, we're about time. So as we wrap up our conversation, what final advice would you give to our listeners when it comes to well-being? It can be anything.
As like what Sanya just said, actually, made me think again about like budgeting. Like some things, like we've done 3 years ago, we've done a huge survey again, Sanya, and it showed like some things are not measured. So you really can't measure some things, because when we surveyed about 2,000 employees around the world for that survey 3 years ago, and we've done it ourselves, we've asked how employees would give, what type of NPS, Net Promoter Score, employees would give their employers based off of the well-being programs that they're offering, if they were to offer like well-being programs. And almost always the result was that, like if my employer were to offer some form of a well-being program, I would be scoring them, either a 9 or a 10, right? So that was, it's about 72% of the people said that. So I find that very exciting, because some things, like some ROI, can't be captured only by results. Perception is also reality. Like why some people stay in your organization and why some of them leave, unfortunately, also trickles down to that perception. So I find that very valuable. And coming back to the perception bit, Gen Z is coming. So I know there are some advocates out there that say like, don't like group them as Gen Zs, they're all people. I understand that too. Let me address that in the beginning before I go any further down the line of saying what Gen Z wants. But our data shows, again, with 250,000 employees out there, Gen Z across the board, Sanya, and Gil, like they're across the board, that one demographic that's feeling worse than any other demographic. Like I'm not just talking about age group here, gender, age group, like location. Gen Z is the one group that's feeling the worst when you standardize everything else. So, and the other thing is that they're not shared, that they're not ashamed or they find it very easy to ask for help. How do I see that? Again, on our data, we see that the rates that take appointments from psychologists is over the roof. The nearest other demographic group that takes so many psychologist appointments, it differs by 20%. It's just ridiculous, it's like they're just bombarding the use of our psychologists. So when you combine these two things, all of the forward-looking organizations today, I believe, are making the case of investing into well-being, whether or not you can see the ROI, because this is what your incoming generation is asking for. So you need to have a reply. Not just because it counts for ROI, not just because like you're going to, save money, but because you need to attract that good talent that's going to stay with you and keep them. For that, it's going to be invaluable, I think. And that's the final thing I want to leave you with.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that, because I found in one of our recent research bits that similar high stress levels and levels of dissatisfaction in Gen Z. And I remember reaching out to a friend. I was like, Serena, like, how do you interpret this? What's going on? And I love that you're saying about their use of psychologists, because for me, in my adult life, I've lived on 3 continents. I don't count, Serbia because I was a child when I left, but I remember in the US, going to a psychologist, there wasn't really a stigma attached to it. Some people went, you didn't really talk about it much, but during my time when I lived in the US, I went towards the end of my time there, and I talked about it with my friends, but it was not widely talked about. And then when I moved to London, I felt like it was a little bit more approachable. And then when I moved to Argentina, I remember getting to know people, and it would say, "Oh, do you want to go get a coffee later?" "Oh, absolutely. But you know what? I have my psychologist appointment. So can we do it at this time?" And I thought, how refreshing. Like, it was just culturally, it was a part of life. And I know when I talk to my friends and colleagues, there's still some differences in how culturally accepted it is across the world. But to me, I'm such a huge proponent of it because I do feel like it helps. It can just make such a huge difference. And even though maybe it wasn't 10, 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't as, I don't know if mainstream is the right word, but all of us can use help on reflecting, and all of us can use help on understanding our emotions and understanding the approach. And that piece of information that you shared about Gen Z just gives me so much hope, because I feel like it's such a great thing that they're going to bring into the society. This like truly maybe global normalization of paying attention to your mental health as much as you should pay attention to anything else. And I would argue maybe even more, because we don't sometimes understand how powerful it is until it starts to have some negative consequences. So thank you so much for sharing that. I do hope organizations, to your point from earlier, to start to, tease out some of this data and look at some of the differences. And a lot of times, I know when we talked, previously about millennials and all the wild things they were going to do in the workplace, I think with every generation, there are positive movements that maybe some of, our older generations, just it either wasn't normal or it wasn't expected. But it's certainly, like, I see it as welcome shifts in the way that, not only how we work and how we show up as employees or workers, but also in our day-to-day lives. So thank you so much for highlighting that. I think it was a really brilliant note and insight to leave our listeners with. So Melis, infinite amount of thanks to you for your time today, for the work that you do, for really, I applaud you and I admire you, because I really believe that you and your organization are out there to make the world a better place. And how lucky are Guy and I to, have an opportunity to make friends with you and share your message with the world. So thank you so much for everything, who you are and everything that you do.
Saya and Gil, thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait to host you back on my podcast, hopefully in the upcoming months. So thank you so much for having me again.
Thank you. Thank you to our listeners for joining. We'll see you all soon. Take care, everybody.